Hi everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and today I'm bringing you the chart reading of Cillian Murphy. Cillian is an Irish actor who's most recently known for his role as Tommy Shelby in the Netflix series Peaky Blinders. And it's based on true stories by the writer about essentially the rise of a mob boss after World War I. And that's who Cillian plays, is the leader of this group. And the series is on its 5th season. So if you followed it, you've really gotten to see the development of his character along with everybody else in the performance. But what's very interesting to me about him in this role is that he's kind of a bad guy, but he's got good intentions. So there's this very kind of complex character to him, and I think he plays that very well. So I want to look at his chart and talk about some of the things that I see that are reflected in the person that we see through his acting, and also some of the things he's done in his life. First of all, if you look at his sun, he has a 4-degree Gemini sun. And when you look at him, he kind of has that Gemini look. You know, Geminis can be considered the Peter Pans of the zodiac, sort of like they never grow up, at least as far as the way he looks. And he's also very gender fluid looking, so he could kind of be male or female. And in fact, he's played a female in an acting role, well, a transvestite, I guess, or something like that. So he's got that look to him as a Gemini. And, you know, Gemini is the sign in the zodiac that's neither male nor female, actually, masculine nor feminine. So I find that interesting in the way that he appears. He also has his sun and Mercury and Venus all close together in what's called a stellium, 3 or more planets bunched together. Now, the Venus and the Mercury are in the sign of Taurus. And if you look into what Venus conjunct Mercury is about, it has to do with communicating. That's Mercury. And Venus is in a beautiful way, in a harmonious way. And then in the sign of Taurus, Taurus rules the throat. So that to me is interesting because he actually started out as a singer and was in a band. So I see that part of his chart especially closely connected to the sun, which is how we radiate our light out into the world, is indicative of that part of him that that gravitated towards wanting to express himself musically. What also speaks to that, and actually I wanted to share something really quickly that I looked up online about having about having Mercury and Venus together. Here it is. It talks about a talent for communicating, has an appreciation of art and creativity with strong pattern recognition, and other areas of interest may be journalism, politics, art, music, or sociology. And when you listen to him in the interviews, if you choose to do that, he does come across as very eloquent. You know, he comes across very beautiful in the way that he communicates, and very diplomatic too. Like I've seen him sort of pressed sometimes in interviews, and he always kind of like is able to kind of float through those experiences fluidly, at least from my perspective. Now, going back to his chart, what also is indicative of him being not only musically inclined, but also as an actor, is the fact that he's got his sun here in Gemini at 4 degrees, opposite Neptune at 12 degrees of Sagittarius. A little bit of a wide orb of 8 degrees, but still an opposition. And when people have sun opposite Neptune in their chart, this makes for very creative people, because Neptune is a lot about accessing the imagination. It's our ability to tune into subtle and nuanced energies, and it allows us then to express those energies. So that's why something like music, where you really kind of have to, in some ways, give yourself over to, because that is also very Neptunian. Neptune's about transcending the ego. So you have to kind of give yourself over to a creative process that allows you to open up and feel and tune into and invite in other subtle energies that is what creativity really is. So he has that in his chart. And then, of course, because it's the opposition, this brings in the experience of the other, or of relating to, because that's what opposition signify. It always has to do with our relationships with other people. So this helps him as an actor and as a performer in some ways to be seen as something otherworldly, or to be seen as something that's almost like idolized, or that people project their image or an image onto him of what they want to see. That's a lot about what oppositions, how they can operate. So this is helpful, really, to have the sun opposite Neptune as an actor, or as a musician, or as a performer. And I did bring up another writing about having sun opposite Neptune in the chart. And it says here, this is from the Astrology Place. It says, sun opposite Neptune is often common in the charts of musicians, actors, and painters, therapists, and counselors. They heal and redeem us, inspire us, communicating this hidden world. They have the ability to do something quite magical. They can almost be anyone they choose, and this is because everything is infused with a sense of impermanence. So, another part of this chart that reflects how we experience him outside in the world. I don't have a birth time on him, so I don't actually know his moon sign or the exact degree of his rising sign. So this is actually what's called a solar chart, where the sun is on the eastern horizon. But I believe the moon was in Aries all of that day. And but again, I don't know the degree of his moon, so it's hard to really speak a whole lot about his moon sign or his rising sign. Now, another interesting part of his chart is that he's got Mars right here at 4 degrees of Leo. Mars is our courage, our self-assertion in the sort of the male principle, as opposed to our solar self-assertive energy. This is more like our ego drive and our action-oriented energy, and how we want to assert ourselves out into the world. Let me get a few more keywords for Mars. Asserting the self, expressing anger, and competing. Okay, so this is his Mars energy in Leo. And again, Leo, going back to actor energy, Leo is one of the signs that's connected with acting, because Leo is dramatic. Leo is very much comfortable actually performing and being in front of others, because they like to be recognized, they like to be acknowledged. That's important to them. So to have your Mars in Leo really is one or another symbol for being an actor. And here's something from the Astro Codex about having Mars in the sign of Leo. It says, Leo is the most theatrical sign And the natural outcome of Mars and Leo is showing off in every possible circumstance. um, Usually, such an individual chooses to show off exactly those traits that are connected with Mars: his physical power, victories, achievements, athletic or military abilities, and more. And what's interesting is that when you look at his physical body, I know he's a runner, but it's like you can see this Mars and Leo physique. I mean, it's almost like Greek god-like, you know what I mean? It's just uh, very Mars and Leo is the best way I can describe it. But you can see it's very like Adonis, I guess, would be an example, I think. So what's interesting about his Mars and Leo, though, is that it squares Uranus in Scorpio. And I heard somebody describe him as an actor as being very beautiful, but having an intensity about him. And you can see that in his acting. He's often cast in these roles where he does play, you know, somebody conflicted, or, you know, psychologically stressed, or, you know, something where he's got to really kind of get into this, these sort of deeper, darker aspects of the character. And I see that as being reflected of this Mars Uranus energy, because, you know, Uranus is about it's this energy of like shock and awakening. So sometimes people with Mars squared Uranus, or having, you know, a connection between the Mars and Uranus, it's like what they do can have this sort of awakening element to people. You know, it can kind of shock people, it can kind of make people think and make people look at something in a different way, you know. So it's interesting because his Mars and Leo might kind of invite you in, but then that Uranus in Scorpio too, Scorpio rules the underworld, and it's about, you know, the more taboo aspects of life. So then we've got this awakening energy expressed through that more taboo way of life. It's like, you know, he's got this in him. He's built to kind of like bring these issues out into more of public awareness, and to wake people up to perhaps looking at things differently, or becoming more accepting of, you know, the outcasts of society, or you know, the parts of society that we may just not fully embrace. So I find that interesting about him. And there was another thing I wanted to say about this part of his chart too, this Mars squared Uranus. Oh, one of the things I saw him say in an interview was that he enjoys the theater, being on stage, the most, because he talked about, you're in control. You are in control of the audience, and it's really up to you to maintain that control. And that there's a pressure about that, but that's kind of what makes him feel alive, I would imagine. And I think that's very much, you know, the thrill-seeking aspect of having Mars squared Uranus in one's chart. So I wanted to talk about a few. Oh, and then here's just one other thing about having being an actor or a musician. He's got Mars and Leo trined that Neptune in Sagittarius. So he, you know, naturally gravitates towards asserting himself in these Neptunian ways, which again has to do with, on one hand, imagination and creativity. All right, I wanted to look at some of the current transits in his chart, and talk about some things that might be kind of happening for him in his life right now. And one of the main things that popped out was the fact that he's having transiting Uranus, which you can see right here in the red, which is in the sign of Taurus. And today it's at 5 degrees 11 minutes of Taurus. But what it's doing is it's creating a 90-degree angle to this Mars here in Leo. And this has been going on for a period of time. Uranus entered Taurus last year in May. And actually what it did first was it created an opposition here to his own Uranus at 3 degrees of Scorpio. Now that's a pattern or a transit that happens to many people at the same time in their life. It's called the Uranus opposition, and it happens to people in the early 40s. But to have it squaring the Mars basically around the same time just kind of intensifies that Uranus opposition. So the opposition occurred, let's see, for the first time in May of 2019. And then it went on to square the Mars in late May, early June. And then Uranus began to retrograde in early August of 2019. And it came back into a square with his Mars, basically at the end of this month, October 2019. And then it's going to go opposite the Uranus again, November, early December. And then Uranus goes direct in January, early January 2020. And then it's going to finally come back and square that Mars in Leo for the month of February 2020, and then oppose that Uranus in Scorpio in the month of March, and then he's done. So this is kind of a big deal. You know, the Uranus opposite Uranus brings up like a lot of change. So does the Uranus square the Mars. And basically the change might be experienced in our relationships with other people, because again, with Uranus opposite Uranus, it has to do with relationships in the outside world. And the opposition, remember, is like a culminating energy. Now, Uranus moves very slowly in the sky, so it hasn't been in opposition in his life to his own Uranus ever. So, you know, there's probably been some inklings of things coming up for him that have been creating change in his life, in his relationships. But at the same time, with the square to the Mars, it's like Mars, again, our assertive energy, but Uranus is like this shocking, changing, but wanting to progress us energy. And so it's like, you know, there could be something going on around this time and into 2020 where it's like he's needing to really learn about asserting himself, because that's Mars and Leo, in like new ways, in ways that in some ways are more aligned with his own need for being an individual, his own need for seeking freedom. I know he became an executive producer on the Peaky Blinders series, but I can't remember. I think it might have started in season 4. So that might be some of this energy, you know, kind of having more freedom in his work in that regards. But you know, it's hard to fully say like what specifically this is talking about. But again, that Uranus squared Mars, specifically, it's an intense energy, because Mars is the warrior and the fighter, you know, and Mars in Leo, but though, wants to do it with dignity and do it, you know, with pride and courage. But Uranus might be, you know, coming in there and creating some disruption, you know, sort of creating some instability, making it a little bit hard to really sort of keep it all together, you know. Actually, physical output of energy, like weightlifting, or, you know, something very physical, is a great way to channel this kind of energy if anybody watching this video is going through this transit as well. And I wanted to read something from Robert Hand about having transiting Uranus squaring your Mars, just to give us a little more focus. This says, watch out for impulsive actions, rash decisions, and other actions that may have sudden, unexpected consequences and undesirable results. You may feel your ego is at stake in some way and that you have to assert yourself now, regardless of the risk of getting involved in an accident. There may be tensions with others who seem to be in your way. It may be difficult to avoid disputes and blowing up at others. This transit challenges your sense of security and just how much you believe you can assert yourself. It talks about the more insecure you are, the more likely you are to do something rash, as a way to say to the world that you are a person to be reckoned with. Authority figures who limit your freedom of movement and self-expression are likely targets for your rebellion. It's not wrong in wanting to assert yourself, but the way that you choose to do this is not very well considered or effective. Do what you must, but act with a little discretion. And it says quite often the effects of this transit are more unconscious. That is, you will not be aware of feeling the ways described, but it can lead to unconscious eruptions of the energy that can be quite disruptive. It talks about, how the energy can come out through accidents if you're not careful. And it says the only real answer to this transit is to try to achieve some security about who you are and what you are doing. Then you will not feel such a great need to break free and take rash and ill-considered actions. So that's a little bit about the transit from Planets in Transit by Robert Hand. Yeah, and of course, the transit of Uranus is setting off not only the square to his Mars, but then it sets off the square between the Mars and the Uranus. So just a time, for him, if he were like a client, I would talk about, just being very aware of this intense energy and wanting to take extra effort to really try and channel it, almost kind of like exhaust yourself so that it doesn't necessarily come out in these sort of impulsive, unconscious ways. The other thing I wanted to mention is that transiting Saturn, which is over here in Capricorn right now, specifically at 14 degrees of Capricorn, transiting Saturn is trining his Jupiter in Taurus at 14 degrees. Now, this to me is speaking to his career success right now. He really seems to be at the peak of his career, or at least heading that direction with the success of this Netflix series, Peaky Blinders. And I feel that, Saturn and Capricorn, Saturn is our work and effort and discipline, trining Jupiter, which is the planet of expansion and growth, luck, optimism, spiritual perspective. But in Taurus, it's like really about growth through, finding financial security in life and, really focusing on making money and on making a stable financial foundation for ourselves. So Saturn with the trine, 120-degree angle, is kind of allowing the energy of work and effort and drive to blend with this energy of success and luck and expansion and growth in his life. So I just see that as a reflection of the success that he is having at this point in his career. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to say about his chart at this time. Again, if you're interested in looking more into Cillian Murphy, and his name is pronounced Cillian, even though it's spelled with a C, check him out on Peaky Blinders. I love the series. I think it's really well done, and there's cool music that goes with the story, and wonderful acting, and there's a love story, and it's just a really cool show. So check it out. And if you like my video, please subscribe. I also do readings, and you can reach me through my website at highaltitudeastrology.com, or send me an email at info@highaltitudeastrology.com. Take care.